now like to invite our next speaker. She is she's Aisha Ghazi. She's online from the UK. So again, a very early day for her today for our benefit, and I'm very grateful for that. Aisha Ghazi is a filmmaker, and she is a founder of iResist UK. She's a prominent lawyer and a documentary filmmaker specializing in human rights and civil liberties. As the director of iResist, she leads efforts in human rights advocacy through documentary filmmaking and welfare work, particularly focusing on refugees, victims of war and conflict, and stateless populations, whose mention we have heard from the other speakers. Because when they have mentioned Rohingyas, there have been conflicts, and they have almost become like stateless people in the world who are denied any kind of human rights. So we have conflicts in many parts of the world, and sometimes they do result in this kind of mass exodus of people looking for safety. And that is the situation of extreme vulnerability. So this is something, that she is going to speak to us about and show us through one of her films. Thank you. Over to you, Aisha.
Thank you so much for inviting me over. Thank you so much for having me in. I hope you can hear me clearly. All right, as you very rightly said, they are not almost stateless. They are absolutely stateless because where they had been living for centuries, they are no more citizens of that state. You know that. They have denied rights of citizenship, and that is the biggest problem they are facing because now the 50% of the community is refugees, and rest of the 50% are going to be refugees very soon because there is no acceptability for them in there, and wherever they are going, they are not welcome anywhere in the world, and that is the worst part of their existence. They are, not welcome anywhere. Well, I will share my experience from my fieldwork in Rohingya refugee camps in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, and my interaction with Rohingya refugees in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. Like every other genocide, like every other forced migration, like Rohingya women are amongst the worst affected victim of the genocide in Myanmar, not just in Myanmar. And they saw the worst that one can imagine before they left everything behind except their lives, right? And becoming stateless refugees. But their misery, unfortunately, their misery didn't end there. They thought that they will just cross the Ratnaf River and that's it. Their life will be much more easier, but it did not happen. Rather, it was their misery that transformed into other shapes. It was never ending for them. They faced worst possible challenges of existence and heartbreaking vulnerabilities in refugee camps in Bangladesh, if you know in what sort of conditions they are living in. There's food vulnerability, there's no safety, and there is no access to education. And the most important thing is there is no access to hope, which, keeps you going. So I don't know how they are coping because they don't see anything. They don't see light on the other side of the tunnel. So if I just particularly focus on the plight of women, because obviously men have their own challenges, boys have their own challenges, young children have their own challenges. But if we are talking particularly about women are the first victim anywhere, wherever there is a conflict, wherever there is a forced migration, wherever there is a war or a civil war or whatever it is. In Rohingya refugee camps, if you know, there are about 1 million people already living in there, where there was an absolute jungle a while ago, and now they are cutting the bamboo trees and they have made their huts, and now they are transforming slowly into fabric huts, and with the help of some NGOs, sometimes they get plastic to use in there. So this is where they are living without any doors. So you can imagine the safety for a woman who is living in refugee camps, which is already overcrowded, where 1 million people are already living in there, and they are living there with no doors, right? Most Rohingya refugees, women in camps, are either survivors of gender-based violence that they saw in Myanmar, or if they are not the direct victims of it, they are witness to it. So trauma is two-way. Rather, either if it's not physical, it's mental. So there's no escape to it, and this is very clear. for each and every one of them, other than the few young girls who are born after 19, um, after, the recent 2017. But anyway, the refugees had been there before 2017. In 2017, the exodus was hyped up, obviously, because so many people came after that. But before that, the refugees were already living there. The only thing that's abundant in their life at the moment is trauma. And every day is a new struggle for them, a struggle to go through all the burdens of existence, like insecurity, violence, extremely limited freedom of movement, and then absolutely no say in community matters, because their lives and freedoms are heavily constrained by the control that their communities have over their social lives. I'm talking about particularly about women, especially regarding their education and their marriage matters. If I come to education, the educated women who are already educated when they migrated from there, they were getting some sort of education and they were educated, and they want to speak about women's rights, or they want to speak about their self identity, about how they want to interact with their social lives and everything. They are harassed and threats. They are constantly in the threat in the camps. And if you know the security issues, the reason is security issues, obviously, which gives the society and the people in the community some more control over their lives. Um, they get the reason to control over them. And then there are cultural obstacles, obviously. It is common for parents to stop their daughters from going to school. But well, to go to school, you have to have a school. That is the first thing. And in Bangladesh, the authorities have restricted humanitarian agencies from construction of functional educational system at Cox's Bazar, if you know that. Because the only reason could be that they don't want to give them a feel that they have settled status there. They are not welcome anywhere, as I already said, because refugees are never welcomed anywhere. Even if they share the same language, same everything, they are never welcomed anywhere. So if they seek to mitigate restrictions over their education and they try to, build some small sort of academic atmosphere within their own shelters, the criminal gangs operating in there, they do not allow that. And most of them face threats from these criminal gangs over girls' education. That is another huge issue. Around 34 plus camps in these, they are congested camps, 34 plus now, it should be more than 34 in Cox's Bazar. They have become a hub of organized crimes, and that is one of the biggest problems for women, because these groups control everything from drug and human trafficking to extortion, and sometimes they are responsible for arson attacks and killings and kidnapping. And this is something very, very common for them. Every other day there is arson attack, and then there are killings and there are kidnapping. So women who are already vulnerable in that, in refugee status, they become the whole focus of their families. Either they have to keep them protected or just get rid of them in some way. So women have to, even if there are some educated women and they find some job with the NGOs who are working there, they have to quit the job because of the family pressures, because of the safety reasons. And after being restricted to their homes with no access to education, no access to any decent work, majority of Rohingya women and young girls, they experience gender-based violence and sexual abuse from their husbands, from their family members, from their neighbors, as well as from the criminal gangs. The violence they face includes rape, forced marriages, physical and mental abuse, and all sort of threats. Just imagine, constantly living under a fear. Imagine, even if it's not that, imagine the trauma of being forced into a marriage. Imagine a trauma of being malnutritioned women and being forced to give birth again and again and again in the camps with no medical facilities. This is something if when we talk about and we are not present there, we have not experienced there, we can't really imagine the intensity of how a woman goes through it. And especially with food vulnerability, with no security, what options are they left with? And there are vultures hopping around looking for the living dead. For them, these are living dead. So what happens? These vulnerable women are being approached by the traffickers with false promises of work and better life. Some women simply do not realize that there is some risk involved, and others may be aware that there is a danger. Obviously, some of them are very well aware there are dangers, but they feel that their situation is so desperate that they are willing to take any extreme measure. Men, women, and children all are equally at risk. I don't say that men and the children, they are not at risk of exploitation, young boys. But men and young boys end up in forced labor. They have to work, day and night and end up with no pay. But women get into much worse, like sexual exploitation, being sold from Bangladesh to Thailand. We have heartbreaking stories, and then they are sold never to return, never to see their families ever again. And if they have a chance to return, for example, like what happened in 1947, the women who had been kidnapped, and some of them had a chance to reunite with their families. Who would they return to? That's a big question, as there is no acceptability for them because of the hollow sense of dignity. Even if men can't offer anything to them to eat, even if they can't offer them protection, they are there to assert that honor lies in women, and men are the sole proprietors of honor, even in those conditions, living in those conditions. So they have no place to go back to. And then the more unfortunate aspect is that all the women being trafficked to all these areas that I talked about, it spans from Bangladesh, within Bangladesh, to India, to Malaysia, to Thailand, so many places where they are sold to. They are not always trapped. Even when they are being sold in prostitution, they are not always trapped. Sometimes they are sold by their own families, apparently to do domestic works. One less mouth to feed in a household already struggling to meet the basic needs. And like old times, human sacrifice still exists. It's kind of a human sacrifice, but we do not realize that it's still existing in our times. And then there are those women who are trafficked to Malaysia, especially Malaysia, and they risk this journey in sea. You must have seen how many people drown in sea, and most of them do not make it to the news. And why they are trafficked, women are trafficked in there, as I mentioned one of the aspect earlier, but there is another aspect. They are sold there to be married because Rohingya men who have already been in Malaysia somehow, they are willing to pay for a bride. And once they arrive in Malaysia and they are married, you know, it is a forced marriage, obviously. It is a forced marriage. They end up living like slave-like conditions. There is no going back, and that is it. I know in conferences people like numbers and graphs and all that, but I deliberately didn't include any numbers and graphs and anything because I believe that counting suffering in numbers make us heartless. Then our immunity builds for numbers. And unless a shockingly bigger number compared to the last one comes up, we don't even stop to see what sort of world we are living in. So I just want to remind you that even if there is a single woman who is dying on her boat from Bhasanchar Island, where they have been, kept now very recently from Cox's Bazar, and they are very much vulnerable to the climate change and everything. So even if there is a single woman who is dying on her boat from being transported from Bhasanchar Island to the mainland in a hope to get a medical aid, right? And there are many women who die on the boat because they do not make it alive to the other side of the water. Even if there is a single girl who is being sold in forced marriage or prostitution, her trauma is larger than life. And that's why my religion taught me the one who saves one innocent life saves the whole humanity. And trust me, we can save humanity just by doing our bit, saving one life. So let's do what we can. Thank you so much.
Thank you for this very vivid presentation, and we will see your documentary now. And these are the issues when I said that this is the South Asia and beyond, because technically that is Southeast Asia when she's talking about Bangladesh and, sorry, not Bangladesh, about Malaysia and Thailand where these women are being sold. So this is a very grave issue that besets the rest of the areas as well. Are we having the documentary now? Okay. So she's made this documentary. We'd like to take a look at it.
Few miles away from these magnificent sandy beaches and luxuries of five-star hotels in Cox's Bazar, this is the world's largest refugee camp. Life cripples to exist in their world. They are Rohingya Muslims, the most persecuted, the most neglected, the most unwanted on earth. Running from their homes that had been burnt by the Myanmar army, walking barefoot for days and nights in the muddy strips of land, carrying the leftover life on their weak shoulders, crossing the Naf River that turned into the graveyard of their loved ones, starving to death in the boats to be rescued, pleading to be allowed to step their feet on land. They arrive in unwelcoming lands. It's a world of suffering. All I could see around me was poverty and struggle. Every day is a challenge for them. They have no opportunity to work and earn. They are surviving on the aid provided by the charities, but charities can't do enough. Obviously, it's a big population living up there, and the supply of even the basic needs is not guaranteed to them. They have to sleep without food at times. They have to fight with pain without medication at times. They have to survive in worn-out clothing, and we can't even imagine the suffering of women giving birth in these camps. Most of the inhabitants of the camp are physically or emotionally scarred. The trauma is so abundant that it's not even considered worth a shock anymore. For them, life is all about pain and lasting struggle. These children who have survived the worst that can be imagined, they dream of getting enough food or having a house that doesn't wash off with every rain. And this is the limit of their dreams. Their imagination for success can't go beyond that. And this limit has been set for them by the world around them. The world that silently watched and neglected their genocide. These were the moments that left me speechless. While filming in the camps, I was standing on a narrow path made in the jungle with a steep edge on one side. And suddenly someone screamed at me to get aside. I saw 4 people carrying a thin wooden box tied to 2 long bamboos. And I didn't realize for a while that it was a funeral. I had never come across such a funeral in my life. I couldn't imagine anything like that. How thin must the body be that could fit in that box? How hard must be the life that people are not even crying while saying goodbye to it? Someone had surrendered to death in the lands not known to him, not welcoming to him, and he was going to be buried in the same lands, with no mournful farewell, because death is the least painful and most dignified option for them. What they have seen and what they are going through is much more painful than the death itself. I was walking along a path beside shelters, and children were playing on the path. There was a little girl. I bent my knee to sit on the floor and angled my camera towards her, although I was at a distance from her. She got scared and ran away. She kept looking back and ran towards her shelter, and I realized that she thought I am going to shoot her with the gun, as that's the only scene she could relate my position and my camera with. She had arrived in the camps a year ago. I didn't even want to imagine her experience of life in such a small age. I wonder what she dreams of. Violence, fear, death, the indignity of constantly being in need. What sort of generation will it be? How will we face them as a fellow human? I stopped by a little shelter and sat with its wall to see and try to communicate with the family residing there. And there, on the floor, I found a little piece of paper with a sketch drawn on it. I could see it is drawn by a refugee child. There was a man drawn on it with one amputated leg. I was speechless.
Since then, I keep this piece of paper in my wallet, always with me. In a world where we celebrate art and expression as the highest form of existence, this piece of paper is the most precious piece of art. It was the bravest expression a little hand could do, within the minimal resources available. I wish I could meet and hug the child who had drawn it. I wish I could hold those little hands and tell them, you have so powerfully expressed your pain that it will resonate in my soul for long. I feel being a refugee is a separate ethnicity, even if they share the same genetic makeup, or same religion, or same language to the people settled in the lands. They are abandoned, as if they don't belong to anyone. Poverty is a separate identity that is not owned or shared by anyone living in prosperity. It hurts me so deep when they are filmed in their worst times. But I have to do this so that I can tell the rest of the world how ruthless and selfish we are, that we can sleep peacefully in our homes in the same world where these people are crippling for the basics of life. They are born in unfortunate lands, and survival costs dignity at times. I'm telling you this story so we don't have an excuse that we didn't know they exist at the same time as we do. The Rohingyas, the most persecuted, the most neglected, the most unwanted on earth.
Thank you, Aisha. I mean, this was really heart-wrenching. And especially one of your lines where you said that state of always being in need, and you don't know where that need is going to be fulfilled, and what kind of dreams do those children dream, and the fears that they live with continuously. And this is, I think, should weigh very heavily on the conscience of the world, because this, what can we offer them? How can we bring any kind of succor to them? So thank you for sharing that very poignant documentary.